The Nation's Memory Institute, in cooperation with the Bratislava-Ružinov district, presents a panel discussion on Czechoslovakia during the communist period, its impact on society then and now.
So, welcome. I'm glad that I am able to welcome you here in House of Culture, how we call it, Dom Kultúry Ružinov in Bratislava. My name is Michal Keim. I work in Nation's Memory Institute in Slovakia. And here we are on a public event, on a discussion where we will speak about a specific topic, how the period of communism, which took 40 years, affected our society. So first of all, thank you to the local municipality in Ružinov and for the location, for the promotion. Maybe very quickly I will introduce who we are, because Nation's Memory Institute, or Ústav pamäti, národa in Slovak, is maybe not clear or what we do. Basically, we are a governmental institute where are historians who are studying, researching and educating and raising awareness about the period of, we call it unfreedom, what are the totalitarian regimes from the 1939 till 1989. So the historians, they really go deep in very specific topics. We have archive of a secret police. We give lectures in schools or public places like this one. We publish books, and that's who we are, very, very quickly. And I am really glad that I can invite here and introduce to our guests. One is my colleague, Patrik Dubovský, a historian.
Hello.
And the second one is Zora Bútorová, who is sociologist. She established Institute of Public Affairs in Slovakia. She has worked in a University of Comenius in Bratislava, also in Trnava University, an Academy of Science. She has a really long CV, and I will just highlight award. She was awarded by President Čaputová in 2020 for her lifelong work. Also her husband, Martin Bútorá, also a sociologist, was supposed to be here, but due to the health issues he is not here, so that's, we are sorry, but I hope we will cover all the topics. And also what is important to mention, that we will record this event, so the audio will be also available in our podcast, which is not public yet. It will be called Fragmenty. We work in Slovak language, and basically I'm here to ask questions, our guests, but maybe an interesting short story why we are here, because usually we run such a discussions or public events, but we have never done it in 20 years in English. But thanks to Mr. Brian Jakubec, he answered some very specific questions about the period of the socialism or communism from our past, and basically we got an idea like, okay, good questions, so let's make it public, and here we are. And also thanks to Ružinov municipality. So we will speak maybe 1 hour. I have several questions. And we will speak about specific events or our past, which for some of you might be unfamiliar or brand new. So if it's not clear, you will be able to ask questions. We will discuss for, as I've mentioned, 1 hour. Then we will give the opportunity to you. If you have specific question, feel free to ask after our discussion. So the topic is, and here what you see, just to have kind of insight, how was it? Because we will speak about the history, we will speak about how the society was affected or impacted by the regime of the Communist Party in Slovakia, and these are pictures from Ružinov from the 70s or 60s. And it's also related to me because my grandparents were living not far away from, so I don't remember these pictures, but it's something related to also our personal stories. So, dear guests, I have a question for both of you, a personal one. so feel free to answer. We will speak about how the communist regime affected the society, but maybe how affected your past or your identity.
Hello, do you hear me? Yes. Well, this is a question where you risk that I will give a very, very long answer because I was born in 1949, so that was just at the beginning of the communist era. And my whole childhood and coming of age and so on was there in that period. I was 40 when the communist regime fell. So I would prefer maybe to, when we will answer your more general questions, I will prefer to give some examples maybe from my life or from the life of my friends and colleagues, neighbors, and so on. So I would stop with this, if I may.
Well, I was born in 1965, so believe me, I remember the Soviet occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1968 when I was a young child, remembering some tanks on the railway station or flying aeroplanes over the heads, and we try with small guns shot on these aeroplanes. That's my really one memory. But what is important to say, I'm coming from the religious environment, from the village near to Bratislava. So the most, let's say, controversial thing by us was to practice our religious life, because my mother was a teacher, father was historian, as me, or me as is he. So it was very hard to practice any open religious, let's say, living style under the control of Soviet tanks, but during the period of so-called normalization by Gustav Husak, but of course on other things as education, which was not free, as you know. Traveling abroad, we were happy when we could go for holiday to Hungary or Poland or somewhere in the so-called German Democratic Republic for shopping, etc. So the life I felt was full of non-liberty things I felt.
And we have introduced ourselves, and I'm just curious, and who we have here. So maybe a question on all of you. Please, can stand up, all of you who are not from Slovakia, so we can have an insight.
Okay, nice.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Good. So we have local people from Slovakia, maybe locals from Ružinov as well, but also foreigners from abroad. Feel as home in here, and also beg our pardon, our English. It's not maybe our strength, so we will try to do our best. Maybe your English is better than ours, or if you're native speakers. So, and we will speak about very abstract things, because maybe if you have heard Slovak people using terms like, it was like during communism or socialism, it was 40 years of ruling party, communist party in Czechoslovakia and Slovakia. So can we, Patrik, briefly introduce this period? What was it about? What were maybe the key historical events?
Yes, these 40 years, as you mentioned, started in 1948 by so-called victorious February, but in reality of the communistic putsch or overthrow in political and society life. So communists in Czechoslovakia, led by Communistic Party of Czechoslovakia, caught the power with violence into their hands and didn't make it free until the November 89, except some few weeks or months in 1968. We will speak about it probably. Well, the history of Communist Party is a little bit older. It started in Czechoslovakia in 1921 when Communist Party was grounded in Czechoslovakia, but it took more and more on the power. But the main reason was why the Communist Party came to the power was, of course, the results of the Second World War, when Czechoslovakia was made free but automatically occupied by Red Army, Soviet Army, and in the parliamentary election in 1946 has won Communist Party in Czechoslovakia, we have to say it, but not in Slovakia. In Slovakia it was Democratic Party. But while the Communist Party was the led party in parliament, then the communists step by step took the power into the hands by anti-democratic methods, as I said, in 1948, and it started persecution and revenge against the opponents of communist ideology and politics, mainly by Democratic Party, as I said, but also by Church, also by the former soldiers of the Western Front, also by the soldiers or fighters of the Slovak National Uprising, etc. So communists step by step has taken all power into the hands by persecution, liquidation of churches, liquidation of, let's say, orders, Orthodox, Greek Catholic Church, etc. And a lot of hundreds of opponents were imprisoned, and a lot of were killed in the prison or assassinated, killed on the border when the Iron Curtain was put on the Czechoslovak border, etc. We will probably speak more about it. So simply said, the communists, starting from 1948, has taken step by step all the power in the country, and they created, let's say, totalitarian regime.
I would like to add some other aspects of that period. First, why was the Communist Party so successful and supported by many people? It was because of the disappointment of the Western countries with the Munich Agreement, when Czechoslovakia, which believed that it will get support from France and England and against Hitler, so it didn't happen. So many people at that time oriented their hopes at Soviet Union, and that was one of the factors why Communist Party was quite supported. And then the other aspect of that very gloomy and bad period in 50s, with all those prosecutions and trials and killing of political opponents and so on, it had also a, I would say, brighter side for many people. And that was because that was a period of huge changes in the society, like industrialization, which was a huge move in Slovakia, which was an agrarian country, quite, I would say, in comparison with Czech Republic, more obsolete and so on. Then urbanization, new cities, houses, as you saw also in those pictures. Many people for the first time got running water and some civilization advantages, and then also a huge upgrading of education, especially, and that was interesting, what we currently call positive discrimination. At that time it meant that kids who were coming from manual workers' families, who belonged to the so-called leading force, like the working class was somehow seen as the leading force of the country. So those kids were given more opportunities to study. So there were some aspects of that period, and of course living standard was increasing and so on. At the same time, it was at the expense of destroying traditional bounds in society, especially the farmers and the countryside. They were really suffering because it was the whole communist ideology was atheistic, it was against religion, as you mentioned, and so on. So there were many painful experiences, and many people who didn't want to go in this direction were discriminated and punished and arrested and got into labor camps and so on. So, but I only wanted to complement this picture that it had this dark and bright side, and this is how it also entered into the collective memory of the Slovak society. And this is how it persists and lives there in this memory. So.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add concerning also to this really nice picture from, let's say, new families and smiling kids, that also from the investigation or researches of our institution, it was not so nice, let's say, or optimistic as these pictures are trying to show us. According to our work in the institute, during the mainly first period of communist regime in 50s or 60s, but also during this whole 40 years, there were a lot of victims, as Zora and also Michal has already said. In figures, there were more than 61,000 people set in the prison for such a political, let's say, criminal. It was more than 86,000 years of imprisonment. It means more than 250 people killed in on the Iron Curtain on the border with Germany and Austria. The same number of assassinated people, some hundreds of people died in the prisons or in labor camps, like in western part of Czechoslovakia, in Jáchymov, etc. There were also the victims of occupation, more than 250, according to the historians, etc. So this period was not only by the building of new houses, of course, yes, why not? But also by victims of people which had courage to make some struggle or with regime, and they lost their lives, their freedom, their families, their health, etc. So don't forget on the victims of this regime.
Maybe I have a question to clarify for the audience. What is a totalitarian regime? Because we mentioned it a lot, but it's quite difficult to imagine, because we are mentioning communists and totalitarianism or totalitarian regime. Maybe what are the key elements? How to control the society? How to rule?
I think the question for sociologists and historian will probably, Zorka, be so kind, you can start.
Well, so it had several aspects and elements. First, the ideological aspect. The ideology was so-called Marxism-Leninism. The idea was that the communism is going to prevail all over the world, that the ruling party, the only ruling party, will be the Communist Party, and the working class is I would say, the front runner of all the positive changes. What did it mean, for instance, in my field in sociology? Sociology was not allowed anymore. It was seen as a pseudoscience, similar to other sciences. Instead of sociology, we had so-called scientific communism, and it was a pure ideology. It had nothing to do with the scientific research and analysis of the trends in the society. The state, people were controlled by state police everywhere, on every step of their life. You didn't know whom you can rely on. It was everywhere. So it was connected with huge fear. Of course, we should mention that, which we didn't mention, the process of so-called nationalization, where all private property was given to the state formally, and those people who were entrepreneurs, owners, and so on, they were really outcasts of the society, either ended up in prisons and being arrested, or tried to emigrate if they succeeded, and they were, of course, the object of mocking. That was the part of the society which simply belonged to the past in this communist era. Class. No, censorship, complete censorship, not only of political ideas but also in culture, in art. In art, for instance, so-called socialist realism as the only one direction how to create, which meant the celebration of so-called heroes of socialism, people who were hardworking, who were, of course, very loyal to the regime, and who were fulfilling those models of builders of socialism. You can continue because there are many.
Yes, of course. I tried to, from political point of view, to see on this problem. The Communist Party, through the, let's say, violence methods in political life, are trying to get all power, on total power. From this word is also this word totalitarianism. And we were only one political party, this Communist Party, which was allowed in the society, but of course by her or by it was two small parties, in Slovakia, and also 3 small parties allowed to exist in the Czech part of Republic, but all power was in the hands of the Communist Party and their members, their functionaries, and directors of factories, etc. They should be members of Communist Party. The let's say forced powers of the Communist Party were so-called people militia. So they were, of course, the workers, let's say, from factories which were wearing guns and arms, probably against any revolutionaries or protesting people. Then the young people should be members of so-called socialistic unit of youth, etc. So all groups of society or inhabitants should be organized in any organization, so-called socialistic organization, in order to be controlled by any organ of communist regime, for example. And these kind of methods were used in all, let's say, levels of society, as Zora also started to say, in economy, agriculture, army, politics, etc. So the people haven't any free space just to make their own activities without this control or supervising of Communist Party, except to be in some illegality. Probably we will speak about it, just to print some samizdat or gathered without the control, etc.
Mm-hmm. So that means that there was no civil society in the real sense of that word. All this was suppressed. While before there were several youth organizations, scouts and so on, very Christian organizations, all this was suppressed. There was only one option, and that was the Czechoslovak Youth Organization. And similarly with women, there was only one women's organization, and so on. So, as it is happening always in totalitarian countries, societies, civil society is the first to be suppressed. So we experienced this during the Second World War with Slovak Nazi puppet state. At that time, too, all civil organizations were in fact prohibited or discriminated against and so on. So this happened also in one interesting element to mention, that formerly it looked well. We had regular elections But these were elections where you had on the list only one party, the Communist Party. Yes, we had quota for young people, for women, to become the members of the parliament, so that it looked well. For instance, there was, due to this quota, we had about 1/3 of women in parliament, which we are not able to reach nowadays. But these were only women who belonged and supported the Communist Party. So, and the same with the youth. It looked as if it reflected the structure of the society, but it was reflected only through the lenses of the loyalty with the communist regime.
Excuse me, now I remember one question of Jan Langos, who is founder of our institute and also former democratic politician after the November 89. He said, or I have written his idea, that the communists proclaimed that we understand how to lead society, believe us, we will do it instead of you, you will be happy, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, when we give lecture, I will just comment very shortly. When we have lectures in schools, especially with youth, because for them it's really far away, all old history, the totalitarianism is very abstract and difficult, and I tell them, imagine from kindergarten up to university, everything is controlled and owned by the state and the political party, every single employer. Imagine that all the companies or wherever you work, everything is controlled by the Communist Party and also all the media. So there is no liberal or free media which you can reach, but they were, maybe you can mention them, but they were not. They were illegal, first of all, illegal, and coming from abroad. So basically the people are living in totalitarian, authoritarian regime. Can we and it has affected, because I would like to focus more on the social aspect rather than historical, so we can skip dates and maybe some names, to make it more clear for you. What were kind of values, or what was the society taught, or because there are still some leftovers. So how did the communist regime, the communist education affected the society, either the youth or adults or workers, with the values, and if they were really successful, or if they were really, because you have mentioned we will lead you, like the communists, and just follow us, if the people really believed in it.
Well, again, this is a huge question. I would like to mention one interesting element of this whole ideology and picture how the society should look like, and it is about the role of women in the society, because this was a huge change for women in Czechoslovakia and especially in Slovakia, that they were introduced and by force included into the labor force. That meant that instead of taking care of children and families, which was typically, especially in the countryside, they had to work, because the communist regime had this extensive type of economic growth, and they needed many people to work, especially in heavy industry and so on. So the idea was that children will be educated in state institutions like daycare, nurseries. Even on a weekly basis, women were giving children to daycare and coming only on Saturday to take them just for Sundays and so on. After several years, it appeared that this was not a clever idea. The communists understood that children were always sick. Women they couldn't work because they had to take care of the children. So step by step, they introduced some more rational ideas and allowed women a little better to combine work and taking care of the families. But during this whole period, and that is important to say, women were given the burden of working, going to work and have their jobs. But as for the division of labor within families among men and women, nothing has changed. So since that time we have this well-known notion of double burden or almost triple burden for women. And so the country, on the one hand, the society seemed to be very open and new and modern. On the other hand, it remained very traditional as for the relationship between men and women. So I wanted to mention this.
Yes, thank you, Zorka, because you inspired me from, let's say, the structure of society, how the communists, they believed that the old period when the church or the capitalists or the owners or, I don't know, somebody from United States of America is creating the society are over. These times are over, and we are here with a new modern model. For example, the Czechoslovak communists planned to reach the so-called socialistic society in 1960, when they enacted the new constitution, and the name of the state changed for Czechoslovak Socialistic Republic, CSSR. Just a detail. But on the other hand, they already proclaimed that the religion is already behind us in the history. We are coming for a new social model when the man or women or, let's say, human body is in the center, not somewhere God over our heads, etc. And they also were modeling this idea into the structure of society. For example, the education of religious on the schools were a big problem for the people. Then, to make a new family on the, let's say, this traditional structure was also a problem, not got into the church for wedding, but on the so-called local nation committee, etc. And also by other Zorka, better it, these, let's say, traditional activities. Everywhere should be the state and communistic ideology with new methods, new view on this, let's say, structural points. And also communists created, as we already had said, the new organization, socialistic organization, starting from the young people. It was Iskra, I don't know how is it in English, then Pioneer Organization, Spark, yes. Etc., until the organization in army, in police, by rentiers, I don't know what else. So everybody should be organized in such a new way, new view on the society, which was led by this new ideology, which already put in the history these old methods which were in Europe for more than 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And now to your question, whether people believed it and how they accepted it. So obviously it's not easy to give a generalized picture because there were all kinds of people. Some of them believed it, but some of them didn't. But what was typical for that period more and more, it was a kind of hypocrisy and a kind of schizophrenia. People were pretending something when they were in public space, at schools and so on. But when they were at home, so they tried to preserve and practice the values in which they believed. That meant that parents told their children, be careful when you come to school, don't mention that we are going to the church or we pray or something, because that wouldn't do any good. For instance, what was typical, if there was a couple for the woman teacher and the man, I don't know what. They wanted to baptize their child. They couldn't do it in their church because neighbors would see them, the parents of the children at school would see them, so they were traveling to some other village or other city to make it anonymously. So this is how they tried to preserve what they believed in, but at the same time they pretended in the public space that they are loyal citizens, obedient citizens, and builders of communism. This is this typical Václav Havel's essay, the Power of Powerless, where he has this picture of the green Zelinar, green, the man who is selling green vegetable, who puts in the window, in the shop window, among the carrots and onions and so on, always a poster when it comes to some anniversary, the poster like the workers of the whole world unite. And the question is, why does he do it? And Havel gives 3 answers. Because this is what everybody does. Everybody does something similar. Because this is what I did 1 year ago and 2 years ago. And because I am afraid not to do it, because what will be the punishment? And this is how we existed. So the life, when Havel had this idea about the life in lie, that it is not simple, you have to be very courageous to live in accordance with what you believe in. And that was typical for Václav Havel, yes, sorry, but I guess that all of you know that it was the first free Czechoslovak president after the fall of communism, and a famous author and a man who spent several years in prisons because of his beliefs. So, yes, a dissident, signature of Charter 77 and so on.
Also important part, how the communist regime is controlling the society. We have mentioned the fear, and what we focus in our institute on is the secret police, the state security, how was it called? So maybe can you briefly give us a brief overview how the secret police is used against basically not the enemies, but exactly against the local people.
Yes, the secret police, so-called state security, štátna bezpečnosť in Czechoslovakia was any ordinary secret service as in any free Western European country, excuse me. But it was an instrument how to protect the communist party and regime. So it was a group of really hard men and officers, and also cooperators of this police, which we can count of thousands in Czechoslovakia, approximately 15,000 during all these 40 years, which were controlling or spying or supervising whole society in all levels, starting from schools, industries, health service, army, police. And they were collecting information about the opponents, about the people who, let's say, providing some criticism of the regime or doing some action activities against the regime, put posters or write some slogans against the regime, or just simply shouted on the regime in the pub. It was also a criminal act. So they collected information, then they, of course, spread fear or invited those people and trying to took them for cooperation, just to put the signature for cooperation, then create a file against those people, and by such methods to hold those opponents in the hands. And of course, they then transfer this information to the, let's say, police or prosecutors, trials, and of course, communistic leaders, which then made decisions what to do with those people, those groups of people, some organizations, secret organization, or printers of samizdats, or secret charge groups, etc. And in the majority of these cases, those people then were punished or imprisoned or liquidated, etc. So it was really a very dangerous armed instrument of communistic regime against their opponents working in secrecy.
Maybe I have additional question. It was basically a law enforcement secret police, but they have convinced or forced many people to cooperate with them.
Yeah.
So can you maybe...
Yes, it was what I said in the beginning. The state security was comprised of official, let's say, officers, members, clerks, etc., but also of the huge groups of so-called secret cooperators, starting from agent, trustee, resident, etc. They were special categories. They were also we could also count them by thousands in whole this 40 years period. They were organized by, let's say, districts and towns and villages, led by these professional members of state security, and they should really in their small and local environment collect information which were aimed against the regime, from opponents, from teachers, etc., from artists, as you said, from writers, and bring them to the state security officers. And according to this information, those people were persecuted.
And maybe I will add, on our website, and part of our work is a register with all the people who are collaborating, and this is something which still pops up. It can be your family members or ancestors if they come from Czechoslovakia. So it's a very sensitive topic, even though we are living 35 years after the Velvet Revolution. So you have mentioned Václav Havel, art, and I will follow up. What was the role of the culture or art? On one hand, the state, culture, art, and also if we can speak about the underground or the opposition against it, because it's, from my perspective, it's an important part of the society.
Yes, it is an important part of the society, and while in Slovakia, for instance, we didn't have a real political opposition, we didn't have political parties, so when the revolution came in 1989, so it was the people from the culture played a very important role, because despite all these terror and totalitarian methods, the culture couldn't be suppressed. Be it the music, various festivals, and so on. This is where many people gathered, young people, and so on. It was impossible to control it. Then artists, for instance, they couldn't exhibit, especially those who didn't go with this socialist realism way of painting, they couldn't have exhibitions, but they were organizing exhibitions in houses, at homes. They were exchanging, for instance, the New Year's congratulations, small. Recently there was a wonderful exhibit of those New Year's PF, as we call it, from all over Czechoslovakia. This is how the artists expressed their ideas, presented their art, and so on. So there were. This is also the way how they did it. In sociology, for instance, we were organizing semi-official various workshops, meetings and so on. This is important to say. Typical, there was open dissent. In Slovakia, there were not many dissidents and signatories of Charter 77. In fact, only I think 36 of them, while in the whole Czechoslovakia it was 2,000 signatories. But we had very strong secret church, which you will speak about. And we had many people in so-called gray zone. Yes. These were people who worked in official structures, but they did the minimum to support those structures. For instance, people, technicians and so on. Like, for instance, in sociology also, we who worked in small institutions which were not ideologically based, like, for instance, I worked in the Institute of Labor and Social Affairs. And there were many people who were expelled from the Communist Party after the Soviet invasion and in the period of normalization, but who were freely thinking, interesting individuals, and we were meeting, discussing, and so on. And from this gray zone, after the fall of communism, many important representatives of the new regime came because they knew how the society worked. They knew they were the part of the institutions, and there were not enough dissidents to somehow to fill in all important positions. So the gray zone in Czechoslovakia, for instance, sociology played its role. We had our Samizdat newspaper, which was which was written in 10 copies and disseminated, of course, among people whom we trusted. But this is how we tried to communicate, and this was happening also in other fields. For instance, psychiatrists and psychologists, they were meeting at homes, at such home seminars. They were translating Western professional literature, and they tried to do this self-education, what could not be organized through the official university education. So the society tried to live and somehow keep the pace with what was happening abroad.
Thank you, Zora. You mentioned this gray zone, because really a majority of people step back to this private zone of the official regime structures. They, let's say, started with tourism, or they went to their gardens in the nature, etc. But of course, some groups, as Zora already said, trying to make some not virtual, but let's say illegal or free activities in culture, in art, in samizdats. Do you know what does it mean, this term samizdats? Probably it's already, they were, let's say, printings, periodical or non-periodical newspapers, books, and other writing texts which were written in the secrecy at home and then spread also secretly among some society or among all republic, and or as Michal already said, were transported from abroad, from Germany or etc. And the other things we have to mention is that they were also very active group of people trying to trying to care about the environment.
Yes.
So-called ochranári, so people who were caring, looking after the keeping cultural and environmental monuments in Czechoslovakia to be renewed and recovered. And they were a very important group which, for example, produced very important document, Bratislava Nahlas, so Bratislava Aloud, thank you very much. And also Slovakia is very known by the quite huge number of periodical samizdats, so these secret typings, not only writing on the typewriters, but later on in the secret printing, let's say, how can we say it, workshops somewhere in secrecy in the cellar or in the garage, and they were very, very high level of quality, produced books and periodicals which were spread around the all, let's say, Slovakia or Czechoslovakia. So these kind of non-official level of culture very support the Slovak and Czechoslovak society, and also support some education, secret education. In my, let's say, topic, also by education of new priests, which were then put in the secret service in the society, etc. So they replaced the rules which socialistic regime didn't do in, let's say, so-called official socialistic education, and printing not free books. That this secret society did this work instead of them. And I think we can say that these activities participated at the fall of communism in the end, in 1989.
So now, long story short, 1968, if maybe you have heard name Alexander Dubček and Prague Spring, many movies, books, it's also quite quoted name often. In August 1968 comes the occupation by the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact armies. And you have mentioned before normalization. Mm-hmm. So maybe briefly, what are this is 1968, so 70s, 80s. What is normalization? Is it normal? Like, why is it's not normalization? That's my quote, I will aim. And then we will slowly move to the Velvet Revolution in 1989.
Yes. Zorka, if I can start with some probably good joke. If you in the Western country will order some good beer and they bring you, I don't know, empty glass with some, I don't know, I don't want to say. So it was normalization. It was not normalization, but unnormalization. It was period of 70s and 80s in Czechoslovakia, which the society was normalized from the point of view of regime. We could say also with some adjective Husak normalization by Gustav Husak, which cooperated with Brezhnev, the Soviet regime, or we can say Brezhnev normalization. But it was period when the all, let's say, successes of the reform, of the Dubček reform in '68 were step by step destroyed or put back, and the communistic regime, this normalization regime, came back to the methods from the period of not 50s but 60s, but the same oppression against the opposition, but not by so violent methods, but in fact they were persecuted as in the 60s, let's say.
Mm-hmm. I would like to come a little back and give my personal experience, because at that period in the second half of 60s I was graduating from high school and decided to study sociology. It was the period of this so-called Dubček's Prague Spring, and I really believed that sociology is the discipline which can help to make our society more free, human, and somehow to combine socialism with liberties and with freedom. So, and when I entered university, so that was my first year of study in '68. And it was really great because professors were very open-minded. A lot of interesting Western books were translated into Czech and Slovak, so there was a lot of good literature and everything looked very promising. And then came the 21st of August and the Soviet invasion. And when I returned back to the university at the beginning of the second year of my study, everything was different. Some of my classmates emigrated, and I would say the brightest of them left. And the teachers, many teachers completely changed. All of a sudden they started to, for instance, teach Western sociology only from Soviet textbooks, because Soviet textbooks gave the only right explanation how how we should look at other views which were not Marxist and Leninist and so on. Some professors had to leave the university, and it was my colleagues who came to study political science. When they came to the second school year, it was not political science anymore, it was scientific communism. So it was really, that was such a lesson for my generation, and the huge challenge for me and for others, how to continue to study sociology and how to then practice sociology in a society which didn't want to have any I would say modernization, and which wanted to come to this so-called normal socialism, as they called later on real socialism. So that was so that was but at the same time, my generation was lucky enough to experience those 60s and to see that the change is possible. That was a crucial experience of my generation, which was then very supportive in '89.
And I will just add, after the occupation 1968, imagine that you have 100,000 Russians located in Slovakia, I mean military. With tanks, artillery and everything, so even you cannot feel free anymore, even though you were communist. There were like 400,000 party members kicked out after they did a cleansing. So basically 1968.
200,000, one-third.
Almost 400,000, yes.
More than 300,000
yes,
communist party members were kicked out from the communist
By
party.
cleansing,
Yes.
by cleansing, yes.
So
Which-
that's the so-called normalization.
Yes, which meant when you take that each of those party members, most of them had their family and relatives, that means that a huge portion of population was affected by this and discriminated against, because those people usually lost their jobs. They had to do some other kind of job and so on. The children were not allowed to study at universities and so on. So there was a huge discrimination which was accompanied with this so-called normalization.
There is also a funny story, not that funny, also a sad one, related to the cleansings and the university you have the stories you have mentioned. There were French tourists after the August 1968 traveling to Czechoslovakia. They were speaking only French, and they get lost, no GPS, no navigation at the time, and they are asking a road worker, like repairing, I don't know, asphalt, something over there, and they tried French, which is kind of mission impossible in Czechoslovakia, and he answered fluent French because the road worker was a university professor.
Yes.
So quite often you can meet the bus driver who were also professors, doctors.
Bus driver got
Yes.
profession for that.
But here it is quite interesting to say that this normalization and discrimination against people who were expelled from the Communist Party, against those professionals, was not so strict and severe as it was in the Czech Republic. While in the Czech Republic they usually were working in the roads and cleaning shop windows and so on. They were manual workers. So in Slovakia, with the so-called soft normalization, they were often sent into some research institutions or some archives and so on, because Slovak society is a smaller society. Everybody knows everybody. So once I help you now, so maybe next time when the situation will change, I will need your help. And this is how it worked also during the Second World War. And this is the system which was applied also under normalization. So it was not so strict and so difficult. No, it was not good, but it could be. Czechs were suffering more.
And slowly we can approach the Velvet Revolution in 1989. So can you maybe elaborate, because it's a milestone we commemorate today. From my point of view, maybe one of the 2 or 3 most important historical events. So for those who haven't heard about it, what is the Velvet Revolution? Can we be brief about it?
Yes, of course we can. But Velvet Revolution is, in my opinion, nice title because it means that it was without the violence. And now I would like to be very serious. After this 36 years, me or probably you, we can see that it was fine, that it was without the violence, probably like in Romania or former Soviet Union, somewhere else. Otherwise, it created more problems with changing of power structures. But in my opinion, I am happy that it was Velvet Revolution, so revolution without the violence, without the dead people on the street. And I think we can say also it was democratic revolution in Czechoslovakia because the political system changed, the people participated directly on the changes, going to the meetings on the streets, participating at the general strike, etc. So they changed the political structure. The adopted MPs in parliaments, Czechoslovak and Slovak, adopted new laws which enabled free election, creating of new political parties which were in opposition against the so far ruling communistical party, etc. So I think it was democratic revolution, we can say it, in my opinion. It was without the violation, and the Czechoslovakia also then happily and successfully, step by step, joined, let's say, all international democratic organizations, but it is far from 89. But what is important that the people participated, thousands or 10,000s, probably in the most important meetings in Prague, in Bratislava, were comprised of, in Prague, 700,000 people. In Letna or in Bratislava, more than 10,000 on Slovak National Uprising Square. So I'm, in my opinion, as a historian, as a citizen, I'm really proud of those people, which were a very important factor to change the totalitarian regime step by step in some semi-democratic or proto-democratic in the first half of 1990.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up question: why did the communists let the power go?
I think, what was before was the period of general decline in Czechoslovakia. Economically, we were really in a decline period. The communists were not, simply they understood that they would not be able to keep the power, and by force not at all. In Soviet Union there was Michal Gorbachev, and that was the period when our communist leaders did not obey Moscow, because Moscow was much more progressive with their perestroika and glasnost. So that was a very positive moment which contributed to the decision of our communists not to go into in violent. Although, as you know probably better than me, but there were also scenarios which were somehow calculating with the possibility to suppress the revolution by force, but then it didn't realize.
Okay, yes, but we have to add also some information from the, let's say, backside. There were also negotiations between the so-called, let's say, a little bit liberal leaders of the Communist Party, as, let's say, Premier Minister Adamec and then Minister Marian Chalfet, etc., which get into the connection, or oppositely, the revolutionary movements as Občianske fórum, civic movement, and people against violence, Verejnosť proti násiliu, get into the connection with those liberal communists, let's say, and trying to clarify the position. Okay, we have behind us several hundred thousands of people which would like to have change of regime, and you have power, you have police, you have army, you have these people militia, and now we have to say it openly. It went to the, let's say, any common decision not to use the power against the demonstrations, but on the other side, our leaders, let's say democratic leaders or opposition leaders, promised not to punish them so much or not at all. Let's say, we have to say it now because it is politics, they are negotiation, and I will repeat it, I am fine that they came to this, let's say, compromises, because then we needn't to have blood in the streets.
Yes, but it is a controversial issue. There are also people who say that it was no compromise should have been done, and it would be better. So
it's a question until now.
Yes, it's a question until now, of course, of that thick line between the past and the present.
And also along the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, also weakening the communist regime, very similar movements are happening in Hungary, Poland, and the key milestone is fall of Berlin Wall in Eastern Germany. So basically this is going on almost in the same weeks or months, and it also affected the politics in Czechoslovakia. You have mentioned it was democratic revolution, but some of the communists, they stayed in offices, they just changed the code. That's also the leftovers of the...
Very briefly, that's a price of non-violence, and I stay by this opinion that it was democratic revolution, but without big compromises. Because it brought the democratic changes until the free election in approximately 6 or 7 months. It brought the plural political system, new political parties, opening of the republic to all countries in the world, so falling of Iron Curtain and open economy, etc., and human rights, and only things. What is big question in my life so far is not punishment of minimally the main leaders of communistic party, which was responsible for the from the human rights violation, also for killings, for imprisonment of people who were not guilty, etc. A lot of them died in the prison. So in Czech Republic, they, let's say, formally put in the prison 2 or 3 representatives of Ministry of Interior for a very, very short time, but nobody in Slovakia. In my opinion now, as a historian, as a citizen, it was a big fault.
I agree with you. And then there was another reason of frustration of many people, and that was connected with the fact that some of those communists became very successful entrepreneurs because they had all information, had their connections and so on, contacts, and they were using it. So this is also the part of the discourse even nowadays that the communists, they really were not the victims, or they were not punished for after the Velvet Revolution.
And also important aspect, Czechoslovakia has like 15 million inhabitants, and members of the party are 2 million.
1,200,000?
Yes, million, I think 600,000, yes, or so. Yes. So how could you... It was impossible to get rid of all party members because they were in fact almost in every family. So that it was important to include them and to get them on the, I would say, on the side of the regime of liberal democracy, which partially succeeded.
Yeah, I have 2 questions left. There still we can experience in Slovakia. I don't know about the foreigners, if you can like see it in media or families, companies where you work. There is kind of a like nostalgia or positive memory, remembrance approach towards like people or elderly people. They quite often quote how great was the socialism and how employment and social care, etc. So why do we still need to face such opinions? Even though, because now we know about the crimes, about the responsibility of the Communist Party, and basically the big issues are all covered and discovered, researched. So why do people believe it still today?
I will give you some information based on data, because this is I'm involved in public opinion polling. So because on the one hand, people in Slovakia accept that the communist regime was oppressive and it didn't guarantee freedom to people. But on the other hand, they think and believe that living standard was increasing and it was a good system, economic system which cared about the social security of people. And this is something what simply was put into the collective memory, and it is not believed only by older generation, but it is transmitted also to younger generations who do not have sufficient information, and there is a huge, I would say, vacuum in collective memory. So it is this double approach. And then what we probably should also mention is the fact that while in Czech Republic, before the fall of communism, the atmosphere in the country was already very much in favor of radical changes, because the Czechs remembered the period of First Czechoslovak Democratic Republic, where they were more advanced economically and private entrepreneurship and so on, more urbanization, industrialization, and so on. While in Slovakia, because of the socialist modernization, which brought some positive economic and social effects, people were more inclining in favor of some perestroika, some small economic and social changes, but it was not the atmosphere that we need to get rid of communism. So we were not so well prepared for this fundamental change which came, and this is also, for me, this is the reason, one of the reasons why it up to now somehow surviving in the memory, and why when we compare, for instance, the attitudes of current Czechs and Slovaks, their evaluation of the previous regime, so in Slovakia it's much more positive than in the Czech Republic. In Czech Republic, the majority of people think that the current system is better than was the communist one, while in Slovakia at this moment is not a majority. So.
You think so?
Yes, I know.
You know.
Unfortunately.
May I add, probably in your country, in Slovakia also, there is a proverb: the skirt is closer to your body as your jacket. So it means that the social life, let's say, to have a flat, to have a work, to have a peace in my, let's say, family, was more important for majority of people as to have some freedom and human rights and, I don't know, right to go to Western Europe for the holiday, etc. And the communists relied on that feeling by people, and they, in my opinion, in reality, were trying to offer these advantages as a small flat, as a work, as a, let's say, not paid healthy system, etc. to those people, getting some let's say, súhlas, alebo approval by the people that, okay, you arranged my good social life. And then they, as I said, they didn't agreed with some dissidents to make a revolution, let's open the country for the world, etc. And it was kind of hypocrisy. Zorka named it as a double approach, and that's a reason why people now also are thinking that the social advantages or any standards is more important for me, for my children, for my parents, as to have some super liberal state. And otherwise, other things, the revolution or the fall of communism meant also that the people which were in majority, let's say, working or worked in the social organization, state-owned factories, etc., they get salary and went home and buy some things, etc. Suddenly they should be responsible for their life and having rights, also having some duties. And it was a big change in mentality of the new democratic people in January or February 1999, which was very difficult for majority of people just to run this kind of human dignity, let's say, and my living style.
I have a last question.
I try to be small sociologist. Excuse me, Zora.
It's okay.
Yeah, well, my last question is a very simple one. For our audience who would like to learn more or discover more, what books, podcasts, or movies would you recommend them to watch about this period or from that period, which are worth to see? Maybe they will be with subtitles or... Because meanwhile you are thinking about it, it's these topics from World War II and this communist regime. If you see movies, TV shows, books, those are the most topics we work with or we kind of bring back to. I think we can mention the website of our institution. Let's say, it is not a joke, but for example, concerning to this samizdat, so these printings, there is a very good website, samizdat.sk, or the Czech Society is offering totalita.cz, for example, our Pandat in Czech Republic, very nice and rich website of the Institute in Prague. But from from internet and television, I should mention a long time.
This is a good question, but now there are quite a lot of excellent books in Czech. Yes. For instance, when we speak about how was the church prosecuted and what happened in the church, so there is a thick book by a Czech author called The White Water, which is describing this whole what happened with the female
order,
women order and so on. So there are several very good movies, like most of the movies, unfortunately, covering the period of communism are of Czech origin. Not unfortunately, but probably symptomatically. For instance, there is an excellent movie, Pouta, which is from the period of 50s, very, very strong. So, I would be able to give a list, but I would need more time. It's not so. Maybe we can Google it out or ask AI. For example, last year awarded movie Vlny, Waves. Maybe you have seen it. It's about the occupation, 1968, the media and the broadcast company. Vlny. Yes. Waves. Definitely. It's a nice one. And brand new one, awarded. And just a year ago, this was I think it was the first movie which was awarded by the Academy, like the Movie Academy, and the second one was about the World War II topic. So also how we cope with our past. So that was just insight for us, like, okay, it's still important for the society. And maybe we haven't really spoke about Iron Curtain, what was it, but in Bratislava you literally could see or be at the Iron Curtain. And on Devin Castle, where you can go, there is a small but quite nice exhibition about the Iron Curtain done by our colleagues together with the museums, Bratislava City Museum, and it's also in Slovak and English. So
if you are over there.
There is solar exhibition next to Bridge of the Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are like kind of like banners.
But Michal, excuse me, I would like to also add some information about the documentary movies, which I prefer. They are documentary movies since from 25 minutes or longer, which are good profile or product probably for you or for some schools. Our institute produced more than 20 such movies, and which you can find on our website or use it by your private or educational activities.
But as a disclaimer, I'm not sure if they are in English or with subtitles. You should learn some.
Okay, yes, you're right. Some of them are. But you mentioned any AI. I don't know what is it, but we can use it.
Okay, but we've spoken about state security, the secret police, and there is a documentary series,
Yes.
with 10 like a mini series of 10 episodes. It is called štátna StB prísne tajné, state security top secret, and each episode is about different topic, and I believe this has to have English subtitles, or on YouTube maybe you can switch some automatic subtitles. It's really good. I mean, covering the stories from late 40s up to the Velvet Revolution. Good. I think we have covered a very wide and very difficult topics in quite short time. And now if you have some question or a comment, we can have several questions. Oh, yeah, thank you. So just wait for the microphone, if I may ask for a cooperation, because we will have it on record and then we can answer.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question. I have a lot of friends who work in the cultural sector, and I was, attending as an observer these protests recently, and a lot of people were drawing comparisons between what is happening currently in the culture ministry with the regime gone by, and I was just wondering if you had any comment or idea on that.
In comparison with the situation before the fall of communism, so at the time we could not protest, we would not have legal small theaters, we would not have concerts, we would not have anything, all this would be illegal. So that's the difference. Of course, the state does not support the culture, it oppresses the culture and so on, but it is still in a free society. So let's hope that those protests will bring some positive results, and by the latest after the next elections.
I will just comment, hope is not enough. We have to
participate.
We have to know what are our civic rights,
yes,
and do whatever we can to protect our rights and democracy. So if you have any other questions, comments, just wait for the microphone, please.
Hey, I just wanted to ask the questions about art and music, and you were talking how during the communist occupation and time that was all underground for anything that wasn't like social realism or approved by communism. And then with the Velvet Revolution and the political change, then the art and music opened up. And I just wanted to ask what that was like that transition, and also how did it happen?
You mean within the music and I think that field was very well prepared for the changes, that it was a very gradual process. Musicians and artists participated directly in Slovakia in the Velvet Revolution. So there are some of the groups which were performing under communism, like the group Bez Ladu a Skladu, which is one of the famous one. Michal Kašak is organizing this huge Pohoda festival, and they were at the time the students at the high school, and they are still performing nowadays. And the songs which they sang at that time are unfortunately still actual, up to date. They are still covering the problems which we have. So it was a very, I would say, smooth process.
Maybe during the Velvet Revolution it took a few weeks, and the public media, they didn't really cover it deeply, or sometimes not at all in the very first days, and they were created pairs from the civic movement people, paired up with the famous actors or artists from National Theatre, TV, and they were traveling from village to village to every town because they were well known. So it was also how they were involved in the Velvet Revolution or in the transition.
Yes, one of the crucial persons of the representatives of the Velvet Revolution, Milan Kňažko, was a famous actor, for instance. And several actors were very important because people knew them. We had also under communism, there was every Monday on TV, there was a theater piece which was produced, drama piece produced by Slovak television. High quality, top quality, and that meant that people, the population knew those actors. And in fact, all of them, I would say, I don't remember any of them who would be against the changes. Many of them supported the changes.
And maybe, I don't know if it's funny, but it's at least interesting. Imagine you have one channel in TV. You have no Netflix, nothing. You have one channel to watch. So everyone was watching it, and they were super well known.
I would like to add that the first gathering of these demonstrants after the 17th of November, they gathered, for example, in the Center for Artists, Umelecká beseda, artists' main building in Bratislava, or in the theater, Slovak National Theatre, Czechoslovakia, or Czech National Theatre. And then this idea of revolution spread from the theaters, let's say in the meetings on the streets, and then in the towns and villages. So. And also you mentioned the musicians. They were good tradition, or quite good tradition of troubadours, let's say, or folklore musicians, but also underground chapels, etc., which also supported the idea of revolution. For example, Ivan Hofman, as a famous such a musician, is author of the a hit, yes,
anthem of the Velvet Revolution.
Yes, of revolution. The title is "We Promised Ourselves the Love," for example.
Okay. Yeah. There was one more question and one over here. Next. Okay.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say that this has to be the best event I attended so far since I'm in Slovakia. I don't go to this attend that much anyways, he knows, but I think this is the best I ever attended. And the reason for that is because it has answered many questions that I bring to her every day in psychology, because I was supposed to be an historian. I ended up being a linguistics, where I ended up studying history, sociology, and psychology. And when I moved to Slovakia, because linguistics is a science, you do a lot of observation. So I could see people behavior, but I couldn't know the answer to that. And I think that was what I have today here. And I could see this mid-transition between the socialism and the modern era. And then the question is, why are people still hanging on the past? Why are these people, more to the new? And you said something very important, that there is a higher people that like the socialism, which is true, because one day I was telling her, at my free time, I go to drive a taxi. I use it to talk to people, and then to talk to people. And then most of the time people will tell me, back into socialism. And I could see the enthusiasm when they say it, right? So I think what I took from here is that people didn't like the totalitarianism of the government, because totalitarianism has to do with government leading the way they do. But socialism has to do with the economic and social behavior. So people didn't like the violence of the totalitarianism, but somehow they like this socialism because, as you mentioned, it takes care of the people and all those things. Another point that I like, which I actually was just mentioning, is when you guys speak, I realized that what happened to Slovakia is pretty much what happened where I come from. We call it colonization, not occupation of the country, but we call it kind of colonization. You had the French troop in the ground, but you guys had it better. You guys had a government. We had a governor assigned by France in the country. And we have this collaborator, as you mentioned, those collaborate with the government. You have people who is doing art and getting punished, so they have to do it underground. Some books are being censorship. And the Velvet Revolution, that's what we do, but we call it Pacific Revolution in the 60s. So if you take Indochine or Algeria, they fight with the French and then, killing. To us, we decided to go the same as the Slovak, but it was in the 60s. And there was this independence. Now, in the 80s, it is what Slovakia is living now that we are living. Some people are still, I want to be French, back in the French way. Some people are, no, I want to be my own independent, I want to live. So I didn't have much question, but it's just great that I was here today. Like, it's very random actually. But a lot of questions I was having in my head, now it helped me to understand better the society because I live here. So I would just want to say thank you very much. And maybe we'll check the institute because I read a lot, but all books are almost in Slovak. I started even to learn the 70s of the mafia. She knows I'm very interested in these Slovak things. There's a big book, but it is in Slovak. I'm trying to AI translate that book, as you mentioned. But I think this was amazing. I'm really grateful that you guys were here and then shared this knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Matuš. I'm native, so probably it won't be that fluent as the others. Sorry. Actually, I had two questions. One was partially answered by you. It was about the nostalgia. Every time when I speak with my mom, she's, I don't want to say the ex-commie, but she has that nostalgia that when she was younger, everything was based on her better, e.g. She felt safer. The quality of the groceries was probably better than nowadays. So it's probably not a question, but just a quick remark. But in your humble opinion, were there some pros in comparison with the current regime, like democratic state? I mean, like with comparison with the socialist state and our Slovak Republic. So that's the first question. And the second question, more historical. I still don't understand why during the occupation in 1968, I assume that we had a really powerful army during that time, at least definitely more vital than nowadays. Why the army didn't retaliate the attack of the Warsaw Pact? That's it. That's a question. Thank you.
Okay, I can start. Thank you. Well, the number of soldiers of all these five armies of so-called Warsaw Pact was more than 550,000. It was a huge number, not only soldiers, but technics, aircrafts, etc. And Czechoslovakia was occupied not only from one side, from Soviet Union, somewhere in the eastern part of Slovakia, but from minimally four sides: Germany, Eastern Germany, Poland, etc. But that's a good question, because I asked myself anytime why some of officers or generals which proclaimed that they were protect their country against the enemy was or remained in the barracks. And the reason is that they were big fear of the victims in the streets. For example, Minister of Defense Ludvík Svoboda proclaimed in the first hours of occupation that stay calm, we don't want any victims. Of course, the Czechoslovak army could, let's say, resist some days or weeks, but there will be a lot of victims in the streets, not only by soldiers, but in my opinion also by civilians. Other sides, probably you have seen some documentary movies. Alexander Dubček is a leader of Communist Party, which was loved by people, not only as any authoritarian dictator, but as a politician with human face. He was surprised by the attack of Soviet army during the night from 20 to 21st. So from that point of view, I don't know, probably some of the communist leaders didn't believe that Soviet Union and other countries couldn't or cannot occupy us by such a power during these first days with such a fear of victims. Of course, such a number of soldiers, techniques, tanks can logically cause a lot of victims in the street. But it also happened during the first months, first months until December, it was more than 100 victims in the streets. During all next period, it was more than 420, according to researches. So my answer is that the generals and leaders led by Ludvík Svoboda as a Minister of Defense, they decided not to respond of the attacks by power. They believed that the situation will be clarified in a few days as a misunderstanding or by any negotiation. The armies will be took back, etc. They didn't believe that it is a real occupation with destroying and victims and also destroying of democratic or pro-democratic system. They thought, in my opinion, that it is big misunderstanding which will be clarified in few days. And therefore it was reason not to put the army against, but otherwise there were some units or barracks, they were prepared. They I don't know how is it in army language, they got the orders just to prepare arms, just to defend the barracks and go, for example, in the Prague or Bratislava in the struggles against the occupants. But the politicians said, or Minister of Defense, no, stay there, we have to negotiate, it will be clarified in a few hours.
And I was just adding to super quick. They have crossed the borders a few minutes before midnight, and the paratroopers in Prague, they landed on airport. Immediately they go after our government. So very similar scenario as was planned in Kiev, in Ukraine. Overwhelmed by the
Soviet Union, let's say, not in Kiev.
I mean in 2022. And in 7 a.m. in the morning, streets were full of tanks. And so.
Yes, I'm not a historian, but the interesting issue is that there was mobilization after the Munich treasure, which ended by demobilization, and it is still a question mark whether it didn't somehow break the backbone of the Czechoslovak
1938.
nation. 1938. Then there was the Soviet invasion, which we didn't simply accept it and didn't defend ourselves. And now we have the Minister of Defense who says that no problem, the Russian comes and the Russian leaves. So for me it is a threatening line here, and the question, what does it mean for I would say for our attitude towards this country and our patriotism and so on. But now I would like to answer, if I understood well your first question. There is a lot of myths about what everything was perfect under communism, and we know from surveys that, for instance, people in Slovakia believe that our food was healthier, that we lived a longer time. Although there are demographic data, everybody knows that the life is increasing, the length of life, that our environment was cleaner than it is nowadays. So all these are myths, this is not truth. But simply it is connected with this nostalgia for the past, and definitely there is this nostalgia of the older generation, which at that time was young and the life was easier and so on. And one element which we didn't mention, that we are living in that Slovak society was a very uniform society. It was the part of the regime that it was an egalitarian regime, so the social differences between people were more hidden than open. It was, even the communists didn't want to show that they are rich. But we didn't have immigrants, we didn't have people disabled were not in the streets. We didn't speak about mental disabled people, we didn't speak about people of sexual minorities. All this was hidden behind the curtain. And nowadays in this diverse society, it is very difficult for many people to accept that the life is much more complicated and that human rights should be the rights for everybody, even for those who do not look the same way as we do. So I think that this is also something what adds to the nostalgia, how simple was everything. Our life at that time was predictable. You just had to know how to behave so that you don't get into troubles with the regime, but otherwise everything was predictable. The limits were clear. So this doesn't look like...
Please, if you are allowing me, add something from my experience. I'm chief of social care department in Ružinov municipality. What is my experience? Seniors, 80 years old, they are thinking that they were sacrificed because after the revolution their pensions were very low and now still they are suffering. When they are asking us, please, we need some social care, we need social care in some houses. Okay, but we don't have empty beds. I'm speaking in a very simple way. Why? You must take care of me. This is your duty, state duty. And and then they are speaking, but you should save your money. You should think about your future sooner. Wow, very bad topic. What is interesting for me, we are in touch with many family members living for 20 years in abroad, age 50, 45, 50, and I'm surprised that these people living in abroad for a long time, they are telling us the same. They are very angry on us. We are using WhatsApp call because they have problem to speak with us. And when I'm discussing with them, please, you are earning better money in abroad, please support your parents. No, you must to take care. This is your state duty. And what I would like to support with this experience, that for us as social workers, it's very difficult to persuade people, please, time is changing. We need to think about ourselves, what we can do for us now. Very difficult. Thank you.
May I, one sentence, excuse me, Michal, to the gentleman. As I guess from my parents during my childhood, the people know or knew about the violation of human rights, crimes, communism, etc. They were not copied, of course, but other side, it is this double approach. They cannot do nothing with this except some protest or something without any success. On the other side, they're trying to be good parents, work for children, get some flats, etc. So it was not hypocrisy, it was really situation they were forced in to be good people, good parents, good workers, and other sides knowing about the crimes of the same leaders which are leading or creating the social life for them, social structures, and they couldn't do anything against that because they haven't power to punish any general secretary of Communist Party for the crimes from 60s or 70s. So they were in a really tricky situation how to morally survive and to be an example for their children, for example. Thank you.
Okay. One more question, and we can pass it also this way because there were some questions.
It might also partially answer his question from just before my question, but for many decades in the Soviet Union, it was ruled with a very tough iron fist, and that's possibly part of the reason why there was not so much. Why there wasn't this decision to fight with the army or something when you see, well, this is inevitably not going to work. But you mentioned briefly about this. But why do you think? Do you have any insight into why in Slovakia the Soviet Union didn't impose this iron fist here? So they weren't as tough.
Maybe like which period you mean? You mean the end of the regime, like Velvet Revolution, or before?
Prior, so from the, especially from the occupation in the 60s, and you did say there were some purges, but clearly it wasn't as severe as in the Russian part of Soviet Union itself. So I wondered if you had any insight why they were more lenient here. She did mention a slight answer to it in that everybody in Slovakia knew each other, and so there was this.
I don't. You mean during the period of normalization that there was this milder type of softer?
Yeah, exactly.
We even didn't need Soviets to intervene because we were doing this by ourselves, our communists. So at that time it was not like in 50s when the Soviet counselor advisors were advising whom to kill, in what type of process and so on. But at that time, during normalization, our communists, including President Gustav Husak, were, I would say, very good pupils, and they carried out the normalization. So we didn't need the Soviets, and what we did, it was milder because of our society and the relationships between people here. I don't know whether I answered correctly.
I don't know if we can answer. I mean, we're asking about why the government in Soviet Union decided not to leave it in that mild form and not to try and impose anything harsher like they did in the Soviet Union itself.
May I add some sentence? They were changed 100%. This leading structure of Communist Party. So this new. Leaders led by Gustav Husak and other guys, they were thankful to Moscow. They got these functions and with all privileges, etc. They were also guilty for a lot of violation of human rights before, so they were happy that nobody will now investigate those times and those persons. And otherwise, there is an interesting phenomenon in so-called socialist countries. It happened also in Poland, for example, by government of General Jaruzelski and Husak also. They told about them that they are patriots. They will, let's say, protect their countries against the Soviets until the, let's say, border when the violence can or could come from the side of Soviets. So we would like to protect our people, their lives, their, houses, etc., until it is possible. And Husak is author of such a slogan, I will accept also when somebody, put on my face something bad from my mouth, but I will be the leader which took out of this crisis the Czechoslovakia. So there was some kind of messianism or something like that by those leaders, but until the border of real violation of the Soviets.
Thank you so much. This is a question. This is a question that goes back to 1938 and Munich. And I've spoken to many Slovaks, I've spoken to many Czechs, and there does seem to be a feeling that Britain and France sold Czechoslovakia down the river. But I'm a bit of a amateur historian, and it seems that whatever was discussed in 1938 wouldn't have made any difference, because at that particular time Germany was reindustrializing, and it couldn't do anything but buy American equipment. And they'd done so to such a point that Germany was virtually bankrupt. And in the vaults, in the banks in Prague, was something they really needed: gold. And that seems to be forgotten. I'm just wondering what, as a historian and a sociologist, you think of that side.
So the question is, what is our perception if Britain and France gave up on Czechoslovakia in the Munich Treaty?
Yes, but I wouldn't say that this will, that it is a factor which can excuse that for people, I would say for the public. It is not a relevant argument, I would say. Would not be a relevant argument.
Yeah, and the perception during the time has changed. So, of course, in the year 38, 39, it was like really, it was understood as a treason from Britain and France. And I think also there is a difference, that is my personal perception, maybe more Czech and Slovaks are different. The Czechs, they took it much worse than the Slovaks, because it's quite often, or even in school books, you can find it as a Munich treason. So it's not called Munich Treaty, but Munich treason. And I'm not sure if some of the people here know what are we talking about, what is Munich Treaty. Basically, Czechoslovakia before World War II gave up to Hitler, and they gave up like borderlands where were a lot of Sudetenland, where a lot of heavy industry was, where were the bunkers, which was the fortifications. So the Czechoslovakia was left like not able to defend herself against Hitler, and it was decided without us. So Britain, Italy, France, correct me, also with Germany, they have decided about this treaty. That's Munich Treaty. It's like a turnover, a milestone in history. I don't think we took it that serious today, like we will blame Britain for it. It's a historical fact, and also about all the topics we speak about, and also your comment about the fruits and whatever. One thing, what is the past, and another thing is what is the perception of the past. Two different things, and because you see kind of one side of the coin, and we have to look on both sides. So the perception is very philosophical and maybe abstract and heavy topic. Yeah, you can comment, and then we have a question over there.
May I one sentence to gentlemen? Yes, I would accept, for example, one of the reasons was that Hitler needs a lot of money to lead the war, to defeat the Bolshevism, etc. Of course, and the Czech Republic or Prague was the rich, let's say, point to get it. But it could be one reason. Such a reasons were during the wartime plenty. Hello? But in my opinion, as a historian, the main reason was, of course, to destroy Czechoslovakia as a state, because Hitler proclaimed in 20th or 30th that Czechoslovakia is a sick product of the Versailles system, and he was for, let's say, reunification of all Germans in the Europe, of course, this argumentation. And that was a reason why he wanted to occupy next and the next territories except the France, Denmark, etc., just to get contact to the Soviet Union in order to attack it. And I believe to Hitler, let's say, that he was, the real enemy of Bolshevism. So he wants to have some space just to start and to destroy Red Moscow.
So I actually have a comment, not a question. And I kind of regret that this gentleman from Africa has left but this is mostly for younger of you. I'm originally from Warsaw, and I really, really enjoyed this. I feel the same way, that it's one of the best lectures I've ever attended on a topic. And my father actually was in Polish version of SB. So that's a whole different thing. But for those of you that have wondered or asked questions about this nostalgia, there's an excellent movie produced in Germany maybe 10-15 years ago. It's titled Goodbye Lenin.
Yes.
And it is in German, but there are English subtitles, and I highly recommend it to anybody. It's an excellent study on the psychology of how people felt the system, and it talks about it's the story of one family that undergoes the system change. Excellent study. I highly recommend it to everybody, and thank you again so much.
Good, thank you as well. We have had many questions. I'm really glad that you are still here and present mentally and physically with us. So this is it. Before I thank our guests, I will announce another discussion similar to this, also in English language. It will be on the April 23rd at 6 in the evening on the same place. I will be here asking questions. American curator from Community History Museum from North Carolina. His name is Glenn Perkins. He's on a Fulbright Fulbright program in Slovakia for a few months. So we will have an opportunity to speak about what is the role of museum, local history, and it will be quite different perspective or quite unique guest. So you are welcome. It's also on the website of Kultus Ružinov on Ružinov municipality. So feel free to come or invite your friends. It's gonna be in English as well.
And it's for free again.
Yeah, it's free. So yeah. So Zora Bútorová, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Patrik Dubovský. My name is Michal Keim from Nations Memory Institute, and we will continue in our journey, duties, and I hope we will meet on similar events in Bratislava or all around Slovakia.